Who among you is someone that you think of when you think of someone who is wise? Who is the wisest person you know? And when you think of who that person is, I ask you, what about them makes you feel that way? Why do you think that person is wise? When we think of wisdom in a spiritual context, we're talking about the capacity of the mind that allows us to understand life from God's perspective. And James is reminding us that there are two different types of wisdom: the wisdom from the world and the wisdom from God. And of course, the true wisdom is from God. As creatures who inhabit this world, we're constantly in that tension of the wisdom of the world pulling at us and the wisdom of God showing us the way. And James is reminding us that as he tells us what wisdom is, he tells us it's not just about this list of what it is. It's about living a life that displays wisdom. In verse 17, wisdom is defined as pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. I think of one of my favorite passages from Galatians when we talk about the fruits of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those are fruits of the Spirit and aspects of what it means to live into wisdom or live with wisdom. So as we consider wisdom, and James is asking us, who among you is wise? There's something that we need in order to experience and express wisdom. And any guesses on what that might be? What do we need? No guesses at all? Smarts. You need to be wicked smart. No, not that. But yeah, you need to be smart in following God. No, what we need is relationships. We need to be in relationship with one another. We need to make time for relationships. We need to be present to one another. We need to share. We need to learn from one another. Our relationships will be far from perfect. We know that if we ever experienced one. Has anyone had a relationship? Any kind of relationship? Of course you have. Has anyone had the perfect relationship? Don't remember, you don't want to lie in church, right? Nothing's perfect. But our relationships is where we learn about wisdom. We grow wiser as we live among one another. We learn from one another. We experience life on life's terms. Because growing in life isn't striving to become perfect. We strive for a sense of wisdom. Have you ever met an old soul? Gosh, I swear sometimes I've met, a 5-year-old who seems more wise than I could ever be. Wisdom isn't just about age. Wisdom is gained in community and relationship, a sense of knowing. So we think about what does it mean to be in relationship, but taking time to get to know one another. Again, when James is asking if there's anyone among you, there's an assumption that we know people, that we're actually living in relationship, that we are connected to each other's lives. Do we believe that here at New Market Community Church it can be said that we live among each other? Are we connected well enough to assess our relationships and even wonder who is wise here? Personally, one thing I really love about this church is having had the opportunity to get to know you, to hear your stories. I love hearing your stories, to be present to you, and for you all to know me. I share a lot here. I've cried here in front of all of you. There's just been this community, this sense of community and sharing, and I've learned a lot. I feel like from 7 years ago when I first started here till now, I've grown because of all of you and what I've learned from you and what I've learned from God. That leads us to always learning. Another key element about understanding this wisdom that James is talking about is understanding that we are lifelong learners, or that we are meant to be. Sometimes we don't all choose to be, do we? One of the greatest pearls of wisdom, or of spiritual wisdom, that I've heard is that life, for as long as we are living, we will actually never have all the wisdom that we need. Did you ever talk to someone who's been like, oh yeah, been there, done that, I'm done with that? I always say, really? You're done with that? Like nothing else can be learned? I go on to say what we learned yesterday was enough for yesterday. We are to keep aware that every minute we can and should and will be open to new things that life wants to teach us about our environment, ourselves, and others. As we evolve, so do the messages that we must add to keep this spiritual evolution going. Our faith, our sense of life and understanding of God didn't stop when the Gospels were written. It continues on. We are continually learning. And when we're wise, we understand that we don't need everything to happen on our own terms. Do you find yourself that you hunger for knowledge from other people? When people of any age, young and old and in between, when you enter into those conversations, do you expect to learn something from them? Are we willing to really listen? Are we willing to really be persuaded by what is good and what is best? Or do we find ourselves entering conversations with our minds made up? I've heard it said that there is something different about knowing your own mind and having your mind made up. Knowing your own mind and having your mind made up. If we enter into conversations with our minds made up, well, then when people express a view different than our own, we won't be able to learn from them. God brings these people into our paths to learn from. I still learn every day. I always say, just when I think I have it all figured out, well, I usually find out more or less in a hard way that I really don't. I do so by being generally interested in other people. And I need, and we all need, people who are genuinely interested in us, don't we? It's a gift to be present to another person. It's a gift to have someone be present to us, to listen with enthusiasm, to share our thoughts, our opinions, our burdens, to have someone take a real interest in you. Doesn't that feel good? A simple thing, really, but it's a huge thing at the end of the day. I can't help but thinking about my Uncle Joe. He died when he was about 93, back in 2014. And I know I've talked about him from this pulpit before, but he has been one of the most inspirational people in my life. Joyful, thoughtful, caring. And he had a gift for the gab. He would talk to everyone everywhere. I mean, we couldn't get through Market Basket, which I don't know what it is. He loved to go to Market Basket. We couldn't get through Market Basket without him knowing everyone, talking to every person that we saw. He knew the cashiers and the checkout people and the people bagging our groceries better than I did. He would come and visit for a couple of weeks at a time and maybe spend a week of that time here at our house. And he would know people that I've been alongside of a long time, and he would know them better than me. I'll never forget one of my favorite stories. He was interested in everything. even the most mundane things. We'd be driving down the road, and I didn't say he's from England, right? So things are different here for him. We'd be driving down the road and have a million questions throughout the whole journey of wherever we were going. Always interested, right up till the end. One of my favorite stories is, Jim was out on the tractor mowing the lawn and riding back and forth in the lines. We were trying to get the lawn mowed for something, with his earphones on to protect his ears. And Uncle Joe went out there and stopped Jim in his tracks to ask him a question about how to mow something. Like he wanted to know something about the intricacies of the tractor or the lawn or whatever. And he stopped Jim from mowing the lawn to ask him the question. And of course, you can imagine Jim being like, "What? Who does that?" He was that interested. That interested in something some of us really don't like to do or take for granted having the opportunity to do or don't think that much of mowing the lawn. He was that interested. Last week I was in Philadelphia with Mary Lou, and we were looking at different colleges, and I don't know why, I was just thinking about him as we were walking through one of the campuses and thinking about, well, if I were Uncle Joe, what would I do right now? And I immediately held the door for all the people in our group and said hello to every single one of them and looked them in the eye. Because that's what he would have done. Everyone has a story to tell, and I don't think in his many years he missed many of them. And he told quite a few of them himself. Sometimes he'd break into old songs. We weren't quite sure what he was saying because, late 70s, he lost most of his teeth, and he couldn't stand his false teeth. So imagine he kind of sounded like Ozzy Osbourne with no teeth. He was really hard to understand. And I could understand him after some time, but most people would be like, "What? What did you say?" Hilarious. But the kind of person that you could bear it all to. A person who you could share your most unbeautiful moments. The kind of person with whom you could say your biggest fears, your biggest regrets, your most hurtful things. And he held it all. Because he was also filled with mercy. Another sign of wisdom. Mercy is one of those attributions to God, right? Mercy is one of God's essential qualities. Grace is the aspect of God's character where we get what we don't deserve. Mercy is the aspect of God's character where we do not get what maybe we should deserve or do deserve. The mercy of God is all-embracing without respect of a particular person. It's not what we earn. We don't earn God's mercy and grace. We receive these gifts of God because of who our God is. When the Pharisees and scribes were asking Jesus, what are the most important commandments? And Jesus said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And, the first question they came back with, do you guys remember what that was? Well, who are my neighbors? Who are our neighbors? We want to know who our neighbors are that we have to love, because, we're only going to love those people. Then the rest of them we don't have to care about. That was kind of the intention of that question back at Jesus from the Pharisees. And the reality is that that's not the right question. It gets to that spirit or letter of the law kind of question, right? Well, I can name 3 houses that are kind of next to mine. That's my neighbors. I don't have to love the next house over. That's not the point. God's mercy and grace extends not because of who we are, not because of where we live, but because of who God is. Humility of heart, as described in Romans, is a high view of God, a sober view of oneself, and a generous view of other people. A generous view of other people. Imagine giving others the benefit of the doubt as much as we would hope and pray they would give it to us. I mean, who here doesn't really want to be receivers of the benefit of the doubt? Anyone? You don't want to be the receiver of the benefit of the doubt. No one's actually looking at me now. They're looking away and keeping their heads down. But don't we all want to be receivers of the benefit of the doubt? Of course we do. If I mess up, which I'm going to do, probably today, I might do it in a minute or two. Gosh, I hope you give me the benefit of the doubt. And I'll give it to you too. Giving each other the benefit of the doubt. Remember, I always say, there's the Gospel of John and there's the book of John Brangie. He was my boss for 12 years when I worked at Anthem Blue Cross. I just adore him, and I'm really excited to see him in a couple of weeks at his daughter's wedding. But he taught me so much, and one of the things that he taught me a lot about is to assume positive intention. And I do. Sometimes to a point of, mistake, where maybe someone actually did have a negative intention and I assume it wasn't. So then they maybe have to double down on their negative intention, so I'll notice. But truly, assume positive intent and give each other a break, a benefit of the doubt. It's part of wisdom. Another part of wisdom. Do you ever assume that maybe you don't know the whole story? This kind of goes in with benefit of the doubt, right? But if we go into a situation and we assume that we know everything about it or the whole story, and we respond or react to what we see, we might not really know the whole story. We might not really experience the true message in learning, and so I have a story for you. And bear with me as I share this story with you. There once was an old man who lived in a tiny village. Although he was poor, he was envied by all people, for he owned a beautiful, beautiful white horse. Even the king coveted this amazing treasure. A horse like this had never been seen before. It was so beautiful, so strong. People offered amazing prices for the steed, but the old man always refused. "This horse is not a horse to me," he would tell them. "It's like a person. How could you sell a person? This horse is a friend, not a possession. How could you sell a friend?" The man was poor, and the temptation was great, but the man never, ever sold the horse. One morning, he found that the horse was not in the stable, and all the people in the village came to him and said, you old fool. We told you that someone would steal that horse. We warned you that you would be robbed. You are so poor. How could you ever hope to protect such a valuable animal? It would have been better if you sold that horse. You could have gotten any price you wanted. Now the horse is gone, and you've been cursed with a misfortune. And the old man responded, "Don't speak so quickly. Say only today that the horse is not in the stable. This is all that we know. The rest is judgment. If I've been cursed or not, how can you know? How can you judge?" The people contested, "Don't make us out to be fools. We may not be philosophers, but great philosophy is not needed. The simple fact that your horse is gone is a curse." The old man spoke again. "All I know is that the stable is empty and the horse is gone. The rest I don't know. Whether it be a curse or a blessing, I can't say. All we can see is a fragment. Who can say what will come next?" The people of the village laughed at him. They thought he was crazy. They thought he was a fool. And all he was really was a poor woodcutter, an old man still cutting firewood and dragging it out of the forest and selling it. He lived hand to mouth, so to speak, in the misery of poverty. And now he actually also, in their eyes, proved also that he was a fool. After 15 days, the horse returned. He wasn't stolen. He had run away into the forest. Not only had the horse returned, he had brought a dozen wild horses with him. Once again, the village people gathered around, and of course they said, "Oh man, you were right. We were wrong. What we thought was a curse was a blessing. Please, please forgive us." And the man responded, "Once again, you go too far. The only thing we know for certain is that the horse is back and that he brought a dozen horses with him. Don't judge. We only see a fragment. Unless you know the whole story, how can you judge?" "Maybe the old man is right," they said to one another. So they said little, but really, in their gossip and mumblings when they walked away, they knew he was wrong. They knew it was a blessing. 12 wild horses had returned with him. With just a little bit of work, those animals could be broken and would make him a ton of money. The old man had one son, and that one son, that young man, began to break the wild horses, but after a few days he fell from a horse and broke both of his legs. And you can imagine, the villagers once again gathered around him, and they said to him, "You know, you were right. You proved you were right. The dozen horses were not a blessing. They were a curse. Your only son now has broken legs." Life certainly does come in fragments. And so it was a few weeks later, the country engaged in war against a neighboring country. All of the young men of the village were required to join the army. Only the son of the old man was excluded because he was injured. Once again, the villagers gathered around that old man, crying and screaming because their sons had been taken, and there was little chance that they would return. "You were right, old man," they wept. "God knows you were right. This proves it. Your son's accident was a blessing. His legs may be broken, but at least he's with you. Our sons are gone forever." The old man spoke to them again. "It is impossible to talk with you. You always draw conclusions. No one knows. Say only this: your sons had to go to war and mine did not. No one knows if it's a blessing or a curse. No one is wise enough to know. Only God knows." We don't know who that woodcutter was, but we certainly learned from his patience in this story. Perhaps he was a woodcutter from Galilee, we don't know. Because we do know that it was the carpenter who said it best: not to worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. We only know a piece today. Having relationships, being lifelong learners, showing mercy and grace, understanding the piece of time that we have is just yet a fragment of our entire lives on this earth. These are yet some of the pieces of what it means to be wise, to grow in wisdom. And through this process, James is not calling us to accumulate a whole bunch of virtues. We aren't called to be more of this or less of that. We can simply figure that out by trying to put our names in front of each one of those things, like, well, Patty is considerate. Patty is peace-loving. Patty is patient. Boy, if we think about that, maybe we can put our names in front of all those virtues for a part of a day or a week or an hour, depending on the day or the week or the hour. It's difficult to live up to that all the time. Our own humility, our own humanness, and this call from James reminds us and shows us of our need of Jesus. Jesus is the one and only who embodied and continues to embody all of these things at all times for all people. help us to move towards being like Jesus, we need to first understand our need for Jesus, to do good in this world, to live out our faith, to understand that doing good means doing good for all people, in all places, at all times, through wisdom. That wisdom that will help us to discern what is good to all people, in all places, in all times. So as we move from this place today on this beautiful Mother's Day, may we grow in wisdom. Maybe your mom was someone who taught you about wisdom, or someone you consider wise, or maybe not. My prayer is that there have been people that have taught you and shown you the way, and that you become one of those too. May it be so. Amen.